Hey, this is Dave DeCamp from antiwar.com. This is anti-war news for Monday, July 7th, 2025. All right, the first story at the top of antiwar.com today. Israel wants a side deal with the U.S. on Gaza Truce. So Israel wants assurances from the U.S. that if it agrees to a 60-day Gaza ceasefire deal, it could restart its genocidal war if it deems that its conditions are not met in negotiations with Hamas. And this was reported by Middle East Eye, citing Israeli media. So under this potential ceasefire deal that's being discussed, the two sides would conduct negotiations during the 60-day truce on reaching a permanent ceasefire. If that sounds familiar, that was the idea of the ceasefire deal signed back in January, was that during the first phase, they would conduct negotiations on the second phase and a permanent end. But Israel never entered those negotiations and then unilaterally broke the ceasefire. So anyway, according to an Israeli source speaking to Israel's Channel 14, the current proposal includes a secret side letter from President Trump that would give Israel the green light to renew the fire if its demands with regards to the disarmament of Hamas and the exile of its leaders are not met. And Israel would be able to decide on whether or not to restart strikes on Gaza. So the discretion would be up to Israel, according to this report. Now, we don't know if this is true, if this is part of the proposal, if the U.S. has already given Israel some kind of assurance like this, or if this is something that Israel is just looking for here. A ceasefire deal reached between Israel and Hezbollah in November 2024 also included a secret side letter from the U.S. to Israel that said Israel could continue to bomb Lebanon if it determined Hezbollah was violating the deal. And as a result, we have seen Israel constantly violate the ceasefire thousands of times, launching airstrikes and carrying out ground raids and continuing to occupy southern Lebanon. Just a flagrant violations of the ceasefire. And Hezbollah hasn't fired back one time. There was some rocket fire that landed in an open area, and Hezbollah said it was not them. That's all that's happened in response. So the Middle East Eye report noted, this is kind of interesting. It said that the Channel 14 report cited a member of the political echelon in Israel, and that is a phrase that is often used to signal that it's a leak from Netanyahu or from Netanyahu's office. And if that's the case, if it's a deliberate leak from Netanyahu, the purpose of this leak could be to try to sabotage the ceasefire negotiations, because Hamas's main demand is for a stronger guarantee from the U.S. that it is committed to turning this deal into a permanent ceasefire. And if Hamas learns that the U.S. is potentially giving Israel some secret side deal, it would make them much less likely to agree to the deal. And we've seen Netanyahu use this strategy before during previous negotiations. He'll state things publicly that he knows are not acceptable for Hamas, that are just a non-starter for the negotiations, in an effort to make sure a deal is not reached. So I think there's a chance that this leak could be about that. And again, there's no confirmation that the U.S. is willing to give a guarantee like this. I think things will become more clear after this meeting on Monday between Trump and Netanyahu, where everybody really stands on the potential of a ceasefire deal. Because if Trump is not actually willing to put pressure on Netanyahu to reach a ceasefire, then I don't think it's going to happen. And there was an analysis in Haaretz, the Israeli newspaper, which is very critical of Netanyahu, but they say that it's clear Netanyahu is already trying to undermine the current negotiations, and basically that the only way a deal is going to happen here is if Trump makes Netanyahu agree. And Trump has that power because Israel is completely reliant on U.S. military aid to maintain military operations in Gaza. So I forget exactly where we left off with the ceasefire negotiations in the last show, but Hamas was given a new proposal by the U.S. and Israel. It's very similar to an old proposal, and Hamas offered a few amendments to it. Nothing that significant. Basically, again, they're looking for stronger language when it comes to the U.S. saying that they're committed to a permanent ceasefire deal. They're also looking for to define where Israeli troops are going to withdraw to. They want them to go back to before March 18th, which was when Israel ended the last ceasefire and began capturing more territory in Gaza. And then the third thing is that they want unrestricted aid to be able to enter Gaza under the UN and the Palestinian Red Crescent's supervision. Because apparently the thing that the U.S. and Israel offered is just related to the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the GHF, which of course has been a total disaster. So in response to these amendments, Netanyahu said publicly that they're unacceptable, that Israel cannot accept any of these. But he also sent negotiators to Doha for indirect talks with Hamas. And those started on Sunday, and according to the reports, they concluded with no progress. I didn't expect any progress to be made, again, until I think the Trump-Netanyahu meeting is going to be a big factor in all this, and that's happening on Monday. So we'll see what happens then. I'm hoping that there is some kind of deal, some kind of relief. One thing, actually, we'll get into that in the next story here. So the next one, the Hamas response to Trump's Gaza ceasefire proposal. So this article is from Jeremy Scahill at Dropsite News. And just basically to summarize it, as I mentioned in the last story, there was the three main changes that Hamas made. Again, the stronger guarantee from the U.S., unrestricted aid, and the Israeli withdrawal to certain lines. And one thing that this says, and I've read from other Palestinian sources, is that Hamas is under a lot of pressure from Palestinians, from the different tribes in Gaza, and just people in general who keep losing family and friends in Gaza, to reach some kind of deal, to make some kind of deal. So that could make a deal more. That makes a deal more likely. It makes Hamas more likely to make concessions. But Netanyahu always has his ways of sabotaging these kinds of things, even if Hamas is willing to make the concessions. So again, as I said a few times already, a lot hinges on this Monday meeting with Trump and Netanyahu. They're going to celebrate their Iran war, and we'll see what comes out of it. And again, the important point for us Americans to understand is that the guy with the power to end this genocide is the President of the United States. He's really the only one in the world who could end this thing with the flip of a switch. And that's cutting off the military aid, because that doesn't just involve cutting off weapon shipments. That involves cutting off, maintenance for the Air Force. That means cutting off the air defenses, support, and all that other stuff. All right. So the next one here, Israeli forces kill 288 in Gaza over 3 days. So this is what was happening throughout the weekend. Just massacres. It's just absolutely horrific, the situation in Gaza. So Israeli forces killed 288 Palestinians and wounded 1,088 over the past 3 days, according to the daily death toll updates from Gaza's health ministry, as relentless U.S.-backed Israeli strikes continue to pound the strip and aid seekers continue to be killed while attempting to get food. So the aid massacres continue. Heavy Israeli airstrikes hit targets across Gaza on Sunday, including Gaza City, where at least 39 people were killed. The Associated Press reported that Israeli strikes on 2 houses in Gaza City killed at least 20. And these are some of the victims of the strikes you see in this picture. These guys are carrying the bodies of 2 children who were killed in strikes on Gaza City. In the Al-Mawasi tent camp in southern Gaza, at least 18 people were killed by Israeli attacks, including 2 families. A survivor of the attack said, quote, "My brother, his wife, his 4 children, my cousin's son, and his daughter, 8 people are gone," end quote. So in its latest update released on Sunday, Gaza's health ministry said that 80 Palestinians were killed over the previous 24-hour period, and among those were 8 people trying to get food who were killed by Israeli forces, either on the way to these aid sites or on the way back. People have also been killed while waiting for UN aid trucks to come through. And according to the health ministry's numbers, since the GHF began operating in Gaza at the end of May, 751 aid seekers have been killed by Israeli forces in Gaza. Just a horrific number. And the Israeli military has admitted to killing some civilians. They've disputed the death toll, but the death toll is not outrageous. If from following the reports every day, it aligns with the daily death tolls that we've seen from these aid massacres, and the reports cite medical officials and eyewitnesses and people who survived the attacks. As we've been mentioning, several studies now, at least 3 that I'm aware of, have concluded that the health ministry's numbers are probably an undercount, by a pretty significant undercount. So, but the daily atrocities continue despite all this talk about a ceasefire. And the way things work with Trump is like he tweets or truths, whatever you call it, something about Israel accepting conditions for a ceasefire, and everybody says, way to go, the peace president did it again. And there's no deal. Nothing, and the people are still being slaughtered by these huge numbers every day. I mean, the average over the past week has been like 90 to 120 people being killed every day. All right, so the next one here, U.S. contractor in Gaza saw colleagues fire on hungry Palestinians. So a similar story to something we covered last week, but I think it's important to focus on this. So an American security contractor who previously worked at aid distribution sites inside Gaza run by the U.S. and Israeli-backed Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, the GHF, has told the BBC that he witnessed his coworkers fire live ammunition at unarmed, hungry Palestinians who posed no threat. In one incident, the contractor said a guard opened fire from a watchtower with a machine gun because a group of women, children, and elderly people were moving too slowly away from the site. A second guard opened fire, and a Palestinian man appeared to have been hit. The former contractor, I really should call them mercenaries, said, quote, a Palestinian man dropped to the ground motionless, and then the other contractor who was standing there was like, damn, I think you got one, and they laughed about it, end quote. So they shot someone, one of these desperate, starving people, and they laughed about it. The former contractor said the teams operating at the distribution sites were told by a team leader that if they feel threatened, shoot to kill and ask questions later. He said that the culture in the company is that there are no rules in Gaza and that the crowds of hungry Palestinians are referred to as zombie hordes. Zombie hordes. That's what they refer to these crowds, again, of desperate people who have been living under the worst conditions imaginable, trying to get food for their families. They call them the zombie hordes. When you talk about dehumanization. The contractor said, quote, if a Palestinian is walking away from the site and not demonstrating any hostile intent, and we're shooting warning shots at them regardless, we are wrong. We are criminally negligent, end quote. He said Palestinians were also harmed by pepper spray and stun grenades used on the crowds, and in one instance, he saw a woman get hit in the head by a stun grenade. He said, quote, this metal piece hit her directly in the head, and she dropped to the ground, not moving. I don't know if she was dead. I know for a fact she was unconscious and completely limp, end quote. So the Associated Press had a similar report that cited 2 GHF contractors who recounted very similar things. In response to the BBC report, the GHF did what it usually does. It denied, said that the allegations were false, and claimed that no civilians ever came under fire at its distribution sites. They were denying that the massacres were happening just outside of their sites as well. And then the Israeli media, made it very clear that these things were happening. So the GHF also claimed that this former contractor who spoke to BBC was disgruntled after being fired for misconduct. But the BBC said that their source, this former contractor, showed evidence that he left the job on good terms. And the former contractor noted that each aid site has CCTV monitoring, and the GHF's claim that no one there had been hurt or shot at was an absolute bare-faced lie. And then over the weekend, the GHF said that 2 of its contractors were injured in a grenade attack, and they blamed it on Hamas, but they didn't provide any video footage. And again, as this contractor says, these places are under CCTV monitoring. And they're saying they were injured by grenades. And, we keep hearing these accounts of their people using stun grenades against Palestinians there. So anyway, it's just absolutely horrific, a stain on our country that we have American contractors, American mercenaries there doing things like this. All right, so the next one here, Freedom Flotilla ship will attempt to break Israeli blockade of Gaza. This one is from Kyle Anzalone at the Libertarian Institute. The Freedom Flotilla Coalition will attempt to break the Israeli siege of Gaza with another ship. Last month, the Madeleine was seized by Israeli forces before reaching the starving people of Gaza. A statement on the organization's X account announced that the next ship will set sail from Italy next week. So this boat is called the Handala, which is going to, again, attempt to break the Israeli blockade on Gaza. And of course, the last time this happened, they seized the ship and arrested the crew, including Greta Thunberg. And then about a month before that, a different ship, a different boat was on the way. It was very far from Gaza, off the coast of Malta, when it was hit by a drone. So these people going on these boats are taking a serious risk to try to bring aid, break the siege of Gaza. All right, so the next one here, Israel carries out intense airstrikes in Yemen. So Israeli Defense Minister Israel Katz on Sunday night announced intense Israeli airstrikes on Yemen, a series of attacks that were confirmed by Yemeni media. The attack came after Yemen's Houthis, officially known as Ansar Allah, launched their latest missile attack on Israel, as the Houthis have vowed their operations against Israel would continue until the genocidal war and siege on Gaza comes to an end. According to Katz, and again also confirmed by Yemeni media, the Israeli airstrikes targeted the Yemeni ports of Hodeidah, Ras Issa, and Salif, which are all located in the Hodeidah governorate, which is on the Red Sea. And repeating a threat from last week, Katz said that Yemen would be treated like Tehran, referring to Israel's recent bombing campaign in Iran. Katz said, quote, "Anyone who tries to harm Israel will be harmed. Anyone who raises hands against Israel will have it cut off. The Houthis will continue to pay a heavy price for their actions," end quote. The Israeli minister also said the Israeli strikes targeted the Galaxy Leader, which is a ship the Houthis seized in 2023 when the Yemeni group first started its attacks on Israel-linked shipping. So also on Sunday, a Greek-owned ship, the Magic Seas, was attacked in the Red Sea, forcing the crew to abandon it. So this ship came under attack on Sunday. There's reports of small arms and rocket RPGs being used and drones in this attack, and the crew had to leave the ship. So far, no confirmation from the Houthis. They generally claim their attacks. Sometimes, though, it does take them a day or two. So we'll see if they claim it. If it's confirmed that this was the Houthis, this would mark their first attack on a commercial ship this year. Their attacks since Israel broke the ceasefire in Gaza have focused on Israeli territory. And for a while, they were also targeting U.S. warships while they were being bombed by the U.S. They were targeting the aircraft carriers that were carrying out those bombings. And the U.S., the bombing campaign lasted from March 15th to May 6th. Very heavy, many civilian casualties, over 250 civilians killed in that short period of time. The U.S. essentially gave up on trying to get the Houthis to stop targeting Israel. And I'm sure Israel really wants the U.S. to start bombing Yemen again. And they'll probably use this attack on this commercial ship to try to convince them to do that. All right, so the next one here, Israel kills 1 and wounds 6 in attacks on southern Lebanon. So this one's from Jason Ditz. So Israel continues to systematically violate the ceasefire with Lebanon this weekend. According to Lebanon's Deputy Prime Minister Tarek Mitri, the strikes were reported across southern Lebanon, killing at least 1 and wounding 6. And that was on Saturday. The strike that killed someone hit a vehicle, and the victims were not identified. The IDF claimed they were a member of Hezbollah's Radwan force, but no confirmation of that on the Lebanon side. And there was a few other strikes, one against a house, one, and then another attack. So several strikes. Not sure if these are all airstrikes. Some could be artillery shelling or something like that. But again, this is this is how Israel handles a ceasefire. It means one side ceases fire. And actually, throughout the ceasefire, the Gaza ceasefire, that went into effect, I want to say January 19th. But they were killing Palestinians in Gaza throughout the whole thing, at a much lower scale. But people kind of forget that. And there was a few airstrikes, but it was a lot of Israeli gunfire. They'd say, oh, they're walking towards us, and shoot them. So anyway, this is just, again, with U.S. backing, Israel just has a history of violating ceasefires. All right, so the next one here, Syria-Israel talks involve seizing North Lebanon. So this article is from Jason again. This is, when I first read this, I thought it was too absurd to be true, but it's not that absurd that Israel is discussing this and Syria with its new government is discussing this. There's no scenario where Lebanon would accept this, but this is pretty crazy. So Israeli media began reporting new specificities about the Syria-Israel peace talks that have been ongoing for a while. And incredibly, they seem to suggest that the deal is centered around discussions of carving off parts of Lebanon to give to Syria's Islamist government. The normalization was centered heavily around the Israeli occupation of the Golan Heights. Israel invaded and occupied parts of the Golan in 1967 and invaded more parts of the Golan in December after the ouster of the Assad government. And the new Hayat Tahrir al-Sham HTS government has argued that public opinion obliges them to try to get the Golan back, or at least part of the Golan. And what's funny about this is that Ahmed al-Sharaa, formerly known by his Al-Qaeda name, Muhammad Abu al-Jolani, the Jolani in his name is really more like Golani because it's a reference to the Golan Heights, which is where his family was from. I forget if he was born in Syria. I think he might have been born in Syria, but I knew he grew up in Saudi Arabia, and then he went to Iraq to fight the U.S. But his family is from the Golan Heights. So anyway, so according to these reports, there's some kind of compromise under discussion that would see Israel return 1/3 of the Golan to Syria, at least nominally, though potentially with Israel being allowed to continue leasing it, and then compensating Syria with parts of Lebanon. The HTS is reportedly keen to seize Tripoli, historically Tripoli of the Levant, to distinguish it from the one in Libya, arguing it is a Sunni majority city that was separated from Syria proper during the French Mandate. They also reportedly want the Bekaa Valley. So these are not like little villages or little pieces of Lebanon that they want. I mean, this is Tripoli and the Bekaa Valley. I mean, that's pretty significant, especially when you're talking about a country like Lebanon that's so small. And one detail that Jason mentions about Tripoli is that 8% of the city's population is Alawites. And of course, we've seen these massacres of Alawites in Western Syria, so there's just the risk there. And so, again, this is just something Lebanon wouldn't ever go for, but I doubt that Israel and Syria really care what Lebanon thinks about this. They but I can't see this going anywhere towards Syria actually seizing this territory. But the fact that they're just talking about it to me is just crazy. All right, so the next one here, the UK restores ties with Syria after grooming Sharaa for power. So this article is from The Cradle. So the UK fully established diplomatic relations with Syria on July 6th after 14 years of having no official relations, as part of a visit of UK Foreign Secretary David Lammy to Damascus to meet the country's new de facto leader, Ahmad al-Sharaa. In a video message on X, Lammy claimed the UK had an interest in Syria's recovery after 14 years of war. He also stressed the importance of addressing illegal immigration, noting that it's hugely important for the UK to continue progress. So Britain played a key role in sparking the war in Syria in 2011, which killed hundreds of thousands, and in bringing the current government led by Sharaa to power. The UK, was very involved in the dirty war in Syria and all of that, and now full relations with a government that is currently committing massacres of Alawites, and there's evidence that the government was tied to the suicide bombing of the church in Damascus, and they kind of seems like they've tried to cover it up. I've seen a few different reports. One thing that we covered was that The group that took credit for it is an offshoot of HTS, Shara's group, but yet you saw the Syrian government blame it on ISIS. They went and arrested some ISIS guys and claimed that they, got the people who were responsible for the attack. But ISIS didn't claim it. This other group did. And then there's other reports that one of the actual attackers was linked to the government. But anyway, so, these things are happening, but it doesn't matter. The UK got what it wants in Syria now. So full relations and all that. All right, so the next one here, Russia and Ukraine trade hundreds of drone attacks. So Russia and Ukraine fired hundreds of drone attacks at each other's territory over the weekend as fighting continues to rage across the front lines in eastern Ukraine amid a stalled peace process. Ukrainian officials said that Russia launched its largest drone attack on the war overnight. This was Thursday into Friday. One person was reported killed in Kiev and at least 39 were injured. Russia fired at least 322 drones and decoys into Ukraine overnight Friday into Saturday, and Russian attacks continued on Sunday with drone and missile strikes reported across the country. Ukraine also fired a significant number of drones into Russian territory and claimed to have hit a Russian airbase on Saturday. According to Southfront, from Saturday to Sunday, Russian air defenses destroyed 159 Ukrainian drones over Russian regions. Also on Sunday, Russia said that its forces captured 2 settlements, one in Ukraine's eastern Donetsk Oblast and another in the northeastern Kharkiv Oblast. And then you see this map here of the Ukrainian drone attacks on Russia. So the heavy fighting comes after President Trump spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin and said that he made no progress on reaching a ceasefire in Ukraine. On Friday, Trump hinted that he could impose sanctions on Russia, saying that he discussed the possibility with Putin. Trump also held a call with Zelensky on Friday, which came after the U.S. halted a series of weapon shipments to Ukraine. Despite the pause in some arms supplies, Zelensky appeared to be very happy with the call with Trump. Zelensky said, quote, "This was probably the best conversation in all this time. It was maximally productive. We discussed the topic of air defenses. I am grateful for the readiness to help," end quote. So the pause in U.S. weapon shipments includes a halt in supply of Patriot air defense missiles, which is something Ukraine's been really asking for. And it comes after the U.S. repelled the Iranian retaliatory attack on its airbase in Qatar using the Patriot systems, which the U.S. military says was the largest Patriot engagement in the history of the U.S. military. And that, of course, was Iran's response to the U.S. bombing its nuclear facilities. So the war continues, and just horrific, the violence and, really the heavy fighting across the front line. We don't know what the casualties are. It's a strange thing that neither side are releasing casualty figures. I see the updates. The Russian defense ministry usually claims, like today, they claimed that the Ukrainian armed forces lost like 1,200 soldiers over the past 24 hours. And that includes, dead and wounded. So, but still, I mean, that's a big number for daily battles. All right, so the next one here, Iran throws cold water on talks with the U.S. So after media reports said the U.S. and Iran were expected to resume negotiations this week, Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesman Esmail Baghaei threw cold water on the idea, citing public opinion within Iran. He told Iranian media, according to the Cradle, quote, "Public opinion is currently so angry that no one even dares to talk about negotiations and diplomacy," end quote. So we've seen these reports. There was one from Axios that I think I mentioned in the last show that said Steve Witkoff was going to meet with Iran's foreign minister in Oslo this week. Then there's another one from Amwaj Media that also said Washington and Tehran were set to restart nuclear negotiations this week. The thing is that neither side has confirmed anything publicly. I think there could be a chance of some sort of informal meeting between Witkoff and Iran, or like between some U.S. and Iranian official to kind of see where they stand. But I wouldn't, even if that happens, I would doubt that it means it's like a resumption of the nuclear talks. It would probably just be to feel things out. But for now, no confirmation from either side that these talks are happening this week. And then we also have these comments from Iran, essentially saying that they're not happening, that it's speculation. These reports about these talks. All right, so I left up my latest Somalia story just because I went over this in the last episode, and I'm going to try to get some more information out of AFRICOM this week. They never answered me. There's a chance that had something to do with the holiday weekend. I'm not sure, but they announced that between June 27th and June 30th, they launched multiple airstrikes in Somalia, and then all the Somali media and the Somali Defense Ministry reported a series of airstrikes in these big battles. And there's, I haven't done a comprehensive search, but I'm pretty sure I'm the only one in like American media who has covered this. And, we don't have any details, so it's hard to parse out, but you would think that like more people would be interested. It would be worthy of some sort of coverage, and there's just nothing. So I want to kind of try to make more of a point to cover Somalia. Maybe even what I might start doing is, because there is local Somali media. And, I think I mentioned this before. As I understand it, I'm pretty sure the government is pretty strict and doesn't want critical media coverage of its war with al-Shabaab. But I might just start covering kind of more daily things from Somalia, even if the U.S. isn't involved, just so we kind of we're aware of what's happening there, because this is a big war that the U.S. is involved in. These are very significant military actions that the U.S. has been taking this year that's barely been noticed by Americans. So just wanted to mention that. But that is it for the news for today. Please go check out our viewpoints, one from NL Sheeline and Carol Daniel Kazbari. Netanyahu returns, but question remains, is it triumphantly? One from Tina and Tonis. Battling for dominance, board games, and bottlenecks. And Tina, I hope I got your name right there. I know I had some instructions on the pronunciation. One from Joseph Solis Mullen. Americans must oppose the establishment of an East Asian NATO. One from Brian McGlinchey. U.S. support for Israel comes at a staggering, multifaceted price. Our spotlight from George D. O'Neill Jr. at the American Conservative. Josh Hammer's Neocon Light Playbook. And that's a response to Josh Hammer smearing the American Conservative for its opposition to war with Iran. And I've seen just like a relentless smearing of people on the right who are opposed to war with Iran, who are opposed to supporting Israel's genocide in Gaza. They really send the attack dogs against them. And again, speaking of people on the right, I want to mention again, I mentioned in the last show, to check out Scott Horton's interview on Tucker Carlson. It was really great. I finished it over the weekend. 3 hours. Scott did excellent. If you're familiar with his work, if you read his book enough already, you'll recognize a lot of the information, but also a lot of stuff, just new and interesting stuff. And I just like to think about people who weren't familiar with Scott, who didn't really know all this stuff. Like someone just hearing all that for the first time, it's got to be really mind-blowing the way he puts it all together. But anyway, go check that out. You could always support antiwar.com by helping us out with a monetary donation at antiwar.com/donate. Other ways you could help us is just by sharing our articles, sharing this show, liking, subscribing, commenting. I will be back tomorrow. Tomorrow, I feel like, Monday, the Trump-Netanyahu meeting might be kind of a big news day. We'll see what happens. But I will be back tomorrow. Thanks for listening.